Viviane is asking, do you find all of your info keyword phrases in Google Keyword Planner? I do not always find them in there. Ultimately, I might be using different sources to try to come up with what they are to begin with. For example, the problems that might be solved by a particular type of product. If you're not sure what those problems are, you go and research the problems and you get a general idea of what that problem is. So for my solid state drives, this was the computer running slow or simply, wanting to improve performance, things of that nature. So once I get an idea of what those problems will be, I'll then take that information and punch it into Google Keyword Planner and try to find some kind of concrete keyword phrase that I can actually base it on. And the reason why I do that is simply because what I might be searching for, what I might have in mind, where before when I was searching, I'm pretty sure this was the phrase that I searched for. Yeah, where I searched for Windows slow starting time. I didn't have any monthly searches showing for that particular keyword phrase. However, there were tons of phrases that mean the exact same thing that actually do have a lot of traffic on it. And so without using the keyword planner to kind of help you refine your idea into a concrete keyword phrase, you sometimes might just slightly end up missing the mark, where you have a page targeting the correct amount of information or the correct type of information, and you might even provide really helpful information there. But ultimately, if you don't make use of the phrases that people are searching for at least once somewhere within your page content on that article, then chances are you won't end up with a search ranking on one of those keyword phrases. So that's why it is a good idea to use the keyword planner. Even if you know what you want to kind of go after, you still want to kind of come here and verify the exact wording that you should really be using. Otherwise, people might not search for that exact wording and they may never end up seeing your page, even though it might be, a really awesome page for that particular purpose. Daryl is asking, so ideally it would be good to find a niche that has several products versus going after a niche that is actually one product with different versions. It really kind of would depend on the amount of information about that product and the amount of information that could then relate to that particular product. With my solid state drives, as an example, while I have selected different products, essentially they're all the same thing. There's really not much of a difference between them except for storage capacities, read and write speeds, the number of times that you can actually read and write a byte to the drive. There are certain things of that nature are really the only differences between those products. So it's not necessarily a case of choosing a niche with a bunch of products as opposed to a niche with only one product. It's really more about having enough informational content on that site and ways that you can go about attracting traffic, which in a lot of cases with higher competition niches does end up being the informational content. So I have built sites that only deal with essentially the same product, but a whole bunch of different versions of it. I've built at least a few of those, and they work out fine too. The difference there, though, was that all those different versions, people actually were searching for them, and the competition was low enough to where I felt like I could actually build a separate page for each of the different versions. And then on top of that, to where there was enough information for the different versions to warrant a separate page. So when you're dealing with maybe a situation like what I have here, where I have my products and I have my different brands, and where I have chosen to group everything onto a brand page instead of having, say, 3 separate pages here for the Samsung products, as opposed to just one Samsung brand page. The reason why I go for the brand grouping of the products instead of separate pages in this example is simply because there are not enough differences between them. You want to be able to write a bare minimum of 500 words or so about a product or about a topic. And if you can't really write that many words about the topic without really having to repeat yourself over and over again, then you might want to, combine it in with something else. So ultimately, knowing the differences myself between these, I could probably write them in 2 to 3 paragraphs at the very most. So it would be really hard for me to write 3 separate articles, 500 words or more per article, and to have those articles actually be significantly different. They would largely be the same article for those 3 separate pages. So that is why I have grouped them all into one. So I hope that makes a little more sense and helped to answer what you were asking there. Dawn is asking, can I use an old site I have and redesign it using these principles? It is quite possible that you can. The main thing I would recommend to do is to make sure that Google has not essentially de-indexed your site or flagged your site in any way. For example, if you had an auto-blogging site about solid-state drives and it had thousands of articles on it, but none of that content was really unique, and you really didn't get any kind of Google traffic off of that website, it's possible, Google might have kind of flagged your site already, and it really becomes a little more difficult to kind of overturn something like that than it would be to just start a brand new site. However, if Google has not done something like that towards your site, maybe you were, manually building your own site. It does have unique content, so there wouldn't be anything there that Google would count against you, but maybe you're simply just not getting the rankings yet. A site like that could be beneficial to have as an older site, because as your domain name gets older, Google will respect your site more and more over the course of time. So with that in mind, what I would recommend to do is look at the pages of your existing website and try to find one of your pages that has a fairly long, unique name to it that you think would most likely not occur in that exact way on other websites out there, and search for the entire title of that page on Google and see if you can find yourself anywhere in the results, even if you have to go 10 pages deep. If you're searching for basically the exact phrase of a long titled page on a site like that, and you can't find yourself anywhere, Google may have very well put a negative note on that site already, and it may be worthwhile to simply start over. Another thing you can do, something like a site search, where you type in the word site, followed by a colon, and then your domain name, and simply verify that Google does indeed have your site indexed. And then on top of that, try and take a long phrase, like something like this one, for example. You search for this, you should be able to find that page at least somewhere in the search results, especially if this whole phrase is not an exact keyword, something that's not going to have competition to go along with it. If you can't find your page, then it's probably best to just start over there. Otherwise, it could be okay to simply redesign it. Go through all of your existing content. If you do feel like Google has not already penalized your site for any reason, go through your existing content and see if any of it fits in line with what you were planning. See how you can maybe even work that content in. It could be a separate category on your site that maybe includes all of your old archived content. Or that content might go, grouped into some of the other categories that you have planned on it. It just kind of will depend on the individual site in terms of working that in with what you may already have. But it certainly can be done. The only way I would not recommend it is if you see any sign of Google having flagged or penalized your site. John is asking, for someone new to this, what is a reasonable amount of income that can be expected per site? I know there are a lot of variables, but just a rough estimate would be appreciated, and how long does that usually take to achieve? That's a really good question. It is a bit of a difficult question to answer because it does vary from site to site. But in general, with the approach that I'll be teaching you guys, the sites with the 20 pages, the initial 20 pages that you create, on average should make somewhere between $50 to maybe upwards of $200 a month, depending on what kind of a niche you actually decide to go after. Now, obviously, the first site that you build here throughout this 30-day program will take a month to build. On future sites, though, you should be able to go through that same process a lot faster to create additional websites. If I really sit down and focus on nothing else but building my Amazon site, I can do it from start to finish in about 4 days or so. If I really wanted to, I could sit around and pump out, a decent number of them every single month. That's kind of how I got started doing it. These days, I'm lucky if I get one made every month or two. However, for the average person, I would say 2 weeks or so is fairly reasonable to build an entire website from scratch. And then in terms of how long it takes to actually start making the money from that website, if you go after a lot of these lower competition phrases, like I have planned for you to go after, things where your all entitled numbers are under 1,000 or even under 500, these become much, much easier to get rankings on. And you can actually have a top 10 Google ranking on some of those phrases before your entire site is even completed. So at the end of the 30-day program, you may already have some traffic coming to your site from those lower competition keyword phrases. And so with everything set up well, you can begin to actually start referring your Amazon sales in your first month. Sometimes it may take a little bit of refining, especially if it's a first approach. You might need to look at what traffic is coming in and see how that is actually working out. Sometimes you end up having to make adjustments to what products you're promoting, where you're promoting them at, how you're directing traffic through your site. So, there are different variables like what you were speaking of. But in general, a couple of months, and you should definitely be seeing some kind of traffic and halfway decent traffic on your site, in fact, that that can convert into Amazon sales. In general, I tend to see, it seems like maybe one or two people will go and purchase something through Amazon per 500 visitors or 500 page views, sorry, that are happening on an average Amazon site of mine. And so each one of those people, sometimes, just depending on what your site is about, sometimes they purchase one product, sometimes they purchase a number of different things all at the same time. So there is a lot of variability with stuff like that. But in terms of the approach and in terms of getting Google to pick up your site and start sending traffic to you, that can easily happen within a couple of months if you go after the right higher traffic, lower competition phrases. Daniel is asking, are you using the terms post and pages interchangeably? I actually do sometimes tend to have the habit of using those interchangeably as a result of WordPress. However, when we get to the actual site building portion of this training, where we're using WordPress to create our site, I will become more specific with that because I do use posts and pages separately in different manners in the WordPress system. But at least as far as tonight, if I've said the word post or page, they're definitely interchangeable. Paul is asking, and I think this is a really good question as well, is Amazon the only site that you get your products to build your sites around? There are plenty of other places that you can find affiliate products to promote. It really is going to depend on your niche as to what might be the best option. You have sites like Market Health that are good for health and personal care related topics. You also have something like ClickBank where you can deal with digital products. But again, you're not going to have that apply to everything. For example, if you're going after some kind of fitness related niche where you might have some fitness products that you're promoting from Amazon, you might also have some kind of digital training course that is available on a network like ClickBank or even JVZoo that you could promote, and those do offer the potential for much higher earnings per sale. A lot of times the digital training courses can give you a 50% commission. And so if you can refer a sale on a $30 training course, then you end up with a $15 commission. Whereas if you wanted to get a commission like that on Amazon, you'd have to refer a sale on almost a $400 product. So with that said, if there is another affiliate network that does seem to have products that fit your niche well, or if Amazon is maybe missing something that you feel like would be a good fit, it is okay to go elsewhere to look. However, be careful about which networks you decide to use. Look into their current terms of service and everything. Find out what their minimum payout amounts are, how long it'll actually take them to pay you, things of that nature. As an example, Commission Junction, CJ.com. They have a lot of physical products as well, just like Amazon, that you can promote. However, the products that are on that network, sometimes they're completely different from what might be on Amazon. They might offer a higher commission on Commission Junction, but there might be a $100 minimum payout amount for that account. I'm a past heavy user of Commission Junction. I still use it to a certain extent these days, but nowhere near as much as I used to. I don't know if they have changed that $100 limit down, if they have lowered that or not, but I know it was $100. When you're dealing with just having one affiliate website and promoting products off of different networks, you might simply run into the case where you aren't able to send enough traffic to each network separately if you're using a couple all at the same time. And so even though you might have made $200 with your website already, it might be spread out amongst a number of different networks, and it might be 6 months down the road before you hit your minimums to actually receive a cash out for those things. So that's really the main thing I recommend to keep in mind. If the products fit your niche, it is certainly okay to go elsewhere. Just try not to overextend yourself with too many networks and or too many minimum payouts and too many networks to the point where it takes you a long time to actually end up getting paid from it. Now, obviously, this becomes less important over the course of time if you build more and more sites. For example, if you had 10 different sites and they were all promoting products both off of Amazon and another website like ClickBank or Commission Junction, then you really wouldn't have a lot to worry about. You'd likely be hitting the minimum payout every single month because you had a number of different properties all feeding into it. Let's see, Paul is asking, what are my thoughts on a keyword that has 27,000 searches, 2,300 all in title, but 608,000 in quotes? I'd probably recommend, just from a general perspective, try to get a little more specific with that. It sounds like you're pretty close. 27,000 searches each month, though, is probably a little on the high side to really expect the competition to be that low. It sounds like, though, because of that vast difference in the all-in title number and the quote number, it sounds like there could be a lot of competition for that topic, but it may simply not be a topic that becomes the primary subject of a page. For example, on a page where I might be here, this IKEA page that I mentioned before, I don't use the model of the product in the title. However, I'm definitely targeting that phrase on that page by making use of it. So it simply sounds like it's a heavily used phrase in your case, Paul, but it's not necessarily used in the title of different pages. So I'd simply try to find if you could make that phrase a little more specific, narrow it down just slightly, and you might find what you're looking for there. See, Vivian is asking, what range of time do you allocate on average for research and planning? In general, I will often do that all in the same day. However, if I'm not necessarily working on it exclusively in terms of that being my only project, it might take a couple of days for me to progress through the research and the planning. The way I have split it up into 6 different steps, if you only have, say, an hour a day that you can devote to trying to work on a site, then, take one portion of that, one of those 6 steps, and, try to do that little part each day. So, if it does take you a week to progress through the research and the planning stage, that is quite all right. But try not to get too hung up on it. And even though it can be tempting, try not to completely research and plan out more than one site at a time. It's really easy to kind of distract yourself with multiple projects, things of that nature, until you kind of get used to being able to churn it all out. It's much more useful to just focus on one. And so the time frame's not really that important, I guess, because each different person might be only able to devote a certain amount of time to it. But you definitely don't want to get hung up on this part of the process.